do try to make sure there are practical outcomes to the discussions that take place. And today's seminar is largely around looking at the three bullet points that we agreed this year and discussing how we take those forward.
Okay, thanks, Larry. So what we're going to do is just go through each of these 3 points on the left-hand side. And the first one is pursue a joint approach to create a system-wide culture of teacher agency, which in turn will support greater empowerment and collaboration. And going back to some of the themes of what I said this morning, that for the government is the creation of a system of teacher agency is critical to ensuring that the curriculum can be effectively deployed, that we've got a confidence within the teaching profession about the judgments it can make about within the framework of the curriculum, and that through the concept of teacher agency, teachers have access to support, to collaboration, to developmental activity, which enables them to fulfil that much more autonomous role within the education system. And from that, there would be much more cooperative and collaborative practice, which is at the heart of the work that we're taking forward to apply the concept of the regional improvement collaboratives to encourage the teaching profession to work more closely together. Now, from my point of view, having the professional associations very close to us about how that is taken forward as a joint priority is really important, because I think it helps to build confidence within the teaching profession about some of the judgments and the steps that the profession has to take to make sure it can fulfil the aspirations that we're talking about within the curriculum and within the concept of teacher agency, and can then have access to support through some of the models that we've talked about already, whereby the EIS or other professional associations will be working in the same way to support that agenda and to ensure it can be more impactful as a consequence. So that concept of taking the joint deliberation of the International Summit, the teaching profession where government and trade unions work together on shared priorities, I think an approach of this type gives us much greater effect and impetus as a consequence of government and trade unions working very closely together.
Yeah. We don't agree on everything, and some areas are generally still contested in terms of how they might be implemented. But one of the comments that I get fed back to me from other teacher trade unions at the International Summit is how effectively Scotland work as a delegation, and how there does seem to be a sense of common purpose around areas such as addressing the impact of poverty on children's attainment chances, and also that we have, despite disagreements, we have a genuine commitment to actually having an ongoing dialogue. One of the members of the NUT asked me once, as they were on the verge of taking strike action to try and get a meeting with their minister, who was still Michael Gove at that point, he said, how do you get a meeting with the Scottish Government? And I said, we'll just pick up the phone and ask for a meeting. And that is not the norm across a lot of systems. So we do have a constructive dialogue in Scotland. And around this idea of teacher agency, we are certainly very keen to share that objective as something that we want for our members and for the profession in Scotland. Because teacher agency is about having autonomy in the classroom, having more control over your pedagogical approaches, more control over your working lives. I started teaching in 1979. For most of my teaching career, and it was 33 years in the classroom, I operated in a very top-down management structure. At one point, when I started teaching, over half the schools in my secondary school, over half the staff in my secondary school were promoted. So your line manager had a line manager, who had a line manager, who had a line manager, and all hierarchically worked up the way. Teacher agency is actually not taking away management responsibilities or the leadership roles, but actually saying, you're a trusted professional. In the classroom, you are the person who can do most for the pupils in that classroom. and we trust you to actually go on with doing that job. And the job of everyone else is to make sure that you have the tools in the classroom to deliver for the young people in your care. So teacher agency, and we have a year ahead of us to talk about school empowerment. Teacher agency is a holy grail for the profession. Professional autonomy and teacher agency are things that, as a professional association or trade union, we are really keen to advance, and the objective there is shared between Scottish Government and the professional associations, but also shared by other agencies in Scotland, such as Education Scotland and IDES. So we do actually have in Scotland, and I was going to try and not mention the pay award, but on the back of the pay award, we do actually have a relatively feel-good factor in schools, and we have an agenda around empowerment that actually gives us a real chance of making progress on this. So I think we're in a good place in terms of the opportunity that is there. That's not to diminish, and I'll come back to it later, the issues of workload and ASN. There are still challenges in the system. But in terms of raising the status of the profession, then I think we do have an opportunity, given where we are at this particular point in time.
Okay. The second commitment is around early learning childcare. Do you want to start on that one?
This was interesting because I've been to quite a few of the summits, and this was the first time the summit has ever looked at pre-5. So it always previously focused on primary and secondary schools. And it was looking at pre-5 in a much bigger canvas than just nursery education. So it was looking, a lot of the teacher unions across the globe organise practitioners from zero, teachers of and childcare workers from 0 through to 18. And it happened to be in Finland, which has a well-established preschool system, which is universal in its offer to parents and families and children. And in the course of that discussion, it was actually John who had raised the issue of, in the early childcare expansion, which is a massive financial commitment from government around pre-5 services, is there a sufficient focus on the education element as well as the childcare element, the social welfare element, and the access to work agenda that's all part of that provision. And that chimed well with us because from a union point of view, we have been concerned that the role of nursery teachers as part of the pre-5 team has been increasingly marginalised, largely for economic reasons rather than pedagogical reasons, because the research shows that that additional pedagogical input into the team can make a substantial difference to the quality of the educational experience in pre-5 settings. So there is a commitment there to have a look and make sure that we are not, even in terms of the 3 to 18 curriculum, that we are not underselling the education element of pre-5. And we were keen to open up that dialogue because there is a huge investment from Scottish Government around pre-5 services.
And the crucial point in this commitment is about the reference to the early level and recognising that this, and again it relates to some of the material we talked about this morning, this is not somehow disconnected to the rest of the journey of children and young people, that this is an absolutely integral foundation to the development of children. So therefore the expansion, and we have to make sure as we expand early learning and childcare, and it's a huge policy proposition that we're taking forward, that we take that forward consistent with our aspirations for the early level. So the importance of of making sure the pedagogy of that early level is well established, to make sure that the approaches to play are fundamental to the delivery of the early level, which we expect to see flowing into primary schools as well, is really operating presenting in a seamless fashion to children as they emerge through the expansion. But to make that happen, we have to make sure that we've got all of the investment correct in people who will be actually leading that process centre by centre around the country. And I think we've taken different steps in relation to the qualifications and the creating and being reassured about the quality of leadership within the early learning and childcare expansion, but we have to be satisfied that that has been undertaken in a way that is absolutely consistent with the expectations in the early level, and that it also enables us to be assured that young people are getting that investment in their educational experience at the very earliest stages. So the quality element of the expansion of early learning and childcare is an issue we have to constantly be coming back to as we wrestle with what's an enormous operational challenge. It's an enormous challenge that local authorities are actively involved in just now. But we have to keep on coming back to that quality and the educational component of all of that as we take forward the expansion. So doing that in a fashion where we open up that dialogue with the professional associations is a real advantage for us to make sure that we do that in the right fashion. Right, the third commitment is that we work jointly together to ensure that a career in teaching is a trusted, attractive, highly qualified and varied career, recognising this is essential to transform the lives of children and young people in Scotland. And for me, there's a couple of elements came together on our trip to Finland, one of which was about Finland and one of which was about Scotland, which came together and certainly led my thinking to come to this conclusion. The point about Finland, and it's the point that I made in my speech this morning, when we looked at the presentation, we'd spent an afternoon in just a compelling presentation about the educational journey in Finland. It was a really valuable afternoon spent undertaking that analysis. The two critical elements of curriculum and essentially trust in teachers led me to a different conclusion about Scotland and Finland. These two elements, strong curriculum, strong trust in teachers, very evident in Finland. In Scotland, curriculum very strong, yeah, absolutely, I was very confident about that. I wasn't so sure about the extent to which the teaching profession was valued, respected, trusted, and given due recognition for the investment in learning and professional development that has been undertaken. And for me, this commitment is really an inescapable commitment given the first commitment, because I can't see again how you have teacher agency if you don't have a really strong, trusted profession that is well qualified, well trained and well developed. But what flows from that is a recognition that we've got to create the avenues and the opportunities to enable that professional learning to be taken forward by members of the teaching profession and for it to be properly recognised. And in that respect, some of the steps we've taken around the establishment of the regional improvement collaboratives, the creation of further opportunities for professional development to be pursued, the work that the professional associations take forward, and this is an important element of the kind of mixed economy of approaches that are taken forward. The professional associations themselves offer professional training and development for the profession, which I want to see as part of the mix of opportunities for professional development, because out of that will come a lot of that confidence, self-confidence within the profession that enables it to make the profound effect that we need it to have on the lives of children and young people within Scotland.
I mean, I think the third bullet point in there just expands upon what value education, value teachers as a strapline is trying to say, because that campaign was about more than just pay. It was also about the professionalism of teachers, how teachers are viewed, not just by their employers, but also by parents and by society. And possibly if we had sat down before we went to Finland, the word trust might not have been in that commitment.
Yeah.
But one of the things that struck us jointly in Finland was how central trust was to the way the Finnish system operates. I attended a seminar where the equivalent of the head of the Learning Directorate was talking about the Finnish system. And he was asked a question, because in Finland they don't have an inspectorate. They don't have HMIE or Ofsted or anything of that ilk. And the question was, well, how do you know that your schools are doing well if you don't have inspection? And he looked genuinely perplexed for a moment and he said, we trust our teachers. And that was the answer. So, you know, they have a system where teachers do actually have a high pedagogical standing. Right? Teaching is one of the most competitive vocations in Finland. You cannot enter it without a master's level qualification, and you are committed to life or career-long professional development. There are other aspects, and you can't just copy one system, but in Finland, and this is where we'll be discussing further, as we might say, down the line. In Finland, a teacher out of their working week is class committed for less than 50% of their working week. In Scotland, our teachers are in the top 3 in the world for class commitment in terms of their contract. So if we do have to talk about how do you actually enable that professional learning, that collaboration. You need to create space for it. One way is, as I think was being referred to this morning, about stopping doing things that don't have an impact. But there are other aspects to that which, as I say, will be discussed further within the SNCT forum. But within that particular commitment, I think there's a recognition that if you want a high-performing system, then you need to value your teachers and trust your teachers. And that is a kind of a theme that runs through a lot of the approaches we're trying to develop across the various patterns of work over the next year.
And finally, on this one, from our perspective, part of this was a recognition that we had to deliver a better pay settlement, because quite clearly we were facing challenges about recruitment, and pay was an integral part of that, which we obviously have taken steps to try to address. The final bit of the presentation is over here on the right-hand side, which is the Empowering Schools message, which essentially was part of the wider work that we've undertaken to take forward the education reform agenda that I've been setting out, where one of my objectives was to put more control into schools, to give schools more discretion over their curricular choices, their staffing choices, their resources choices than was the case just now. And after a lot of discussion around whether that should be a legislative approach or a non-legislative approach, we've worked with our local authority partners to take forward a non-legislative approach, and we very much involved the professional associations in that dialogue about how we do it. And indeed, the wheel that you see there is a product of the dialogue between ourselves, our local authority partners, the professional associations, and various other stakeholders, the parental community, pupil voice, to make sure that we've done this on the basis of a shared agenda, the objective of which was to create a more empowered system where more initiative and opportunity to shape the agenda of schools rests within the control of head teachers and individual schools. And that's been a further illustration of the type of collaborative approach between the government and the professional associations, which has helped the policy process.
Yeah, I think the decision that the DFM took not to pursue legislation has made a real difference to the potential of the empowerment agenda to actually take hold. If there had been a legislative process, we would be bogged down now in MSPs navel-gazing or scoring party political points. Because we've had a more collaborative approach, we're actually in a very good place where we have across the elements of, I'm not quite sure if it's a wheel, a jigsaw or a pie, but the bit with all the bits, We now have agreed draft statements about what all of this means in practice. And they are now out for consultation over the course of next year. Now, there's already a bit of progress, because originally they were to be published for the start of this term and to be operational. But within the collaborative approach, we decided to avoid mistakes we made in the past, which is to say, well, it's on the website, so therefore it's ticked off, and say, actually, this is so different from the way things are done. Schools will actually need time to take this on board and think about practical implications. So this entire session, all of the agreed drafts will remain as agreed drafts, and feedback will be invited over the course of the session so that we can move towards formally signing it off in a year's time. From an EIS point of view, we're actually hugely excited about the empowerment agenda, because it chimes with all of our ambitions around autonomy and teacher agency. We're unashamedly using it as the catalyst for our Time to Tackle Workload campaign. So we are saying to people to take the DFM's advice and to audit your school practice. And if you are doing things which you cannot demonstrate is having an impact on teaching and learning in the classroom, you really should be deciding not to do that. Now, there will be contested areas within that, but there are a lot of strong messages already in the system. Tackling bureaucracy, which again was a collaborative approach 5-6 years ago, I think it was now, issued a lot of good guidance on key drivers. One of them was around forward planning, which came up at every meeting I attended. I spoke on Monday at a packed meeting in West Lothian on Time to Tackle Workload in the EIS meeting, and I mentioned the advice on forward planners. And I said, every time I speak, I repeat what was said by everyone in the system, that forward planning is a professional tool for the individual teacher. It is not acceptable for a head teacher to ask teachers to submit their forward plans and for the head teacher to take them home over the weekend and mark them and give them back. Not acceptable. Unnecessary workload for the head teacher, who already have a challenging work-life balance, and demeaning for the autonomous professional in the classroom. By all means, have a professional dialogue around forward planning, but forward planning is about teaching and learning in the classroom, not about having files of forward plans on hand in case the QIO or HMIE happen to pop in. Because I remember sharing platforms with HMIE at the time who were saying exactly the same thing. They are not looking for ring binders full of paper trails. They are looking to see what is happening in the classroom and is effective teaching and learning being delivered. So we're going to use a lot of this to say to schools, just examine your practice. Does this reduce workload? Well, not automatically. But what it might in the first instance do is give people more control over workload. Because I think one of the frustrations that people have around workload is a sense of doing things for other people rather than doing things because you think it will help your pupils. So an opportunity again around actually making sure the focus is upon improving teaching and learning and not about accountability systems. And the empowerment agenda, I think, is a real opportunity for the whole system. And it will be a big change, right? It will be a change for local authorities. They'll have to think differently about the demands they put on school management teams. It will be a change for school management teams. They'll have to look in a different way around how they enable collegiality within their schools. And it's an opportunity, I think, for classroom practitioners to step up and actually have more control over their working environment.
Okay, and from my point of view, this is a device and a means of enabling us practically in the classroom to tackle the issue of workload and to focus on what adds value to the learner journey. So, you've heard enough from us. Time for some Q&A. We've got about 15 minutes before the session closes. Gillian's got a microphone up there. We're live streaming this, so we'll need to have the microphone so folk can hear the questions. So, who's got any questions? Down the front, this gentleman here.
Can you have a wait to the back?
Yeah, exactly, right in front.
Thanks very much. I think this is all very exciting, especially like the last part about teachers being trusted, because I've seen that in Europe, that teachers seem to be valued more highly. I don't know if you were here earlier when, I can't remember the gentleman's name, Pak T.
Yeah.
Yep. And he talked about the fact that lots of lawyers would be delighted that their children are becoming lawyers and doctors. And I think society doesn't often think it'd be great that their sons and daughters are becoming teachers. How do we change that view in society, outside of just that this is working on teaching, but in society in general, how do we change that culture and that view?
Well, you go first.
Well, again, I think that, back to the idea of value education, value teachers, the pay levels will certainly be useful in terms of it's a competitive salary, it will be attractive, but people will be aware of the pressures around, workload pressures and work-life balance. I think actually showing that teaching is a rewarding job is something that we should all invest in. I know when we carried out a survey, the majority of our members indicated they wouldn't recommend teaching as a profession. That was in the middle of the pay campaign. I would, right? I have, both my son and daughter. My daughter's in her first year as a teacher, my son's a student probationer in a primary school in Glasgow. I think teaching is a wonderful profession. I think engaging with young people, next to playing for Celtic, is probably the thing I would like to do most. But elevating, raising the status of teachers by creating this greater sense of professional standing, in a way that other professions are regarded as professions. I think that's what we have to work towards, and I think we do have to actively promote teaching as a profession on a whole range of issues, not least amongst the BME pupils, right, who don't necessarily see teaching as a high status profession. We need to work to change that, and this is part of the agenda, I think, about raising the profile.
I agree with these steps. I think there's another element, which is I think we've got to illustrate how teachers change lives. And when we did our marketing campaign to try to expand teacher recruitment, which actually has, we've seen an uplift in participation, which is really encouraging. I think the pay deal helps that because it makes teaching more competitive. I spoke to two guys earlier on today who have gone for the STEM bursary route, so they've left careers in computing and engineering to come in through the STEM bursary to come in to be computing science teachers, which is great. Measures like that can help, but we've also got, our campaign talked about how teaching makes people. And I was at lunchtime today at St Paul's Secondary School in Pollok, and I heard one story which was utterly remarkable about how a young lad who has arrived in this city from Ethiopia as a refugee on his own at the age of 15, what his teachers in that school are doing to transform that boy's life. Now, it was literally unimaginable what they were doing. And I know that lots of folk are doing that in different parts of the country. And I think people need to hear about that, because that is what teaching does. It utterly transforms lives. And I don't think that message is quite received and understood as much as it needs to be in our society. So I think that there is a point about a general, what is the point of teaching intervention, which would help by some of those examples. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, there's one over there. Thanks.
I think if we want to change our teaching profession and we want it to have a higher standing in society, then teachers ourselves need to promote it. There's too much on Twitter about how hard worked we are, etc., and we're the only people that can change that. Larry, you're saying about tackling teacher workload. See, if we reduce the contact time for teachers, where are we going to get the teachers to backfill that teaching time? Because we struggle to fill posts at present. We've got a working time agreement, I think that working time agreement, if implemented effectively by head teachers, enables staff to work collegiately within the schools and across local authorities to impact positively on teaching and learning.
Finland doesn't have any difficulty recruiting teachers, right? It has queues round the block, people trying to get into it. And that's because they have managed to raise the status of teachers, and it is seen as a significant profession in which to have a successful career and a rewarding career. So I'm not worried about the challenge of recruiting teachers. If we are reducing the class contact time and improving the professional learning opportunities, that's contributing towards a better work-life balance, it's raising the status of teachers. And I think that's part of, along with the salary increases, that becomes part of a much more rewarding profession to move into. So it becomes a kind of virtuous circle. The more you raise the level of teachers, the easier it is to recruit people in, because it is seen as a rewarding career. I do accept your point, that there is sometimes, and again, some of this goes back to the political class, there's a narrative of failure around Scottish schools, which is totally off the mark. I mean, I think the work that is going on across the country in schools, day in, day out, is truly remarkable, and it doesn't get trumpeted enough. We now only have we don't have any education journalists in the daily papers anymore. Andy Denham has left the Herald.
There's one.
One, or half of one. But one of the things that's happening already is that education only gets reported in terms of news. And news usually means something's going wrong, and then that's getting reported. And all the good stuff that's going on all the time is known by the parents and by the local community, but it doesn't get that kind of profile because, John's example from St. Paul's there, that sort of stuff is going on repeatedly across the country. So I think, I would take the challenge from your question that we do collectively have to do more to talk up teaching as a profession, so that we do get the level of applications, not just in the subjects that are already well balanced, but we actually start filling home economics. You cannot get home economics teachers for love nor money. So we do have to start getting more people into the profession, and raising the status of the profession, I think, is a big ticket there in terms of the hooking people in.
I think there's an awful lot that goes on in the school education system that we don't hear about, that is of enormous benefit, in the point I was making to this gentleman about transforming lives. And that is a difficult message to get across, because fundamentally families are hearing about that and experiencing that at a local level. But I think what I hope comes out of this agenda is a much greater sense of discussion about the value of teaching, the importance of the career, and the impact it can have on the lives of young people. And if we get more of that sense dominating the discussion and the commentary, then I think we'll begin to address some of the issues that you talk about. But active participation by teachers in that debate is very, very important.
Hi. I know you're discussing the ISTP commitments and the Empowering Skills agenda, but as one of the elephants in the room, and I think there are several elephants in the room, it's getting quite crowded, but one of the biggest elephants in the room is the under-resourcing of ESN and how that is impacting on teachers and learners within schools. And obviously, we welcome the announcement of I think it's 1,000 support staff. And I think that's great, but it's a bit like putting an elastoplast on a broken leg. So what I'd like to ask John is, what future commitments is the government going to, and what is on the agenda for the future of ESN in Scottish schools?
Well, in terms of the policy position, to be honest about it, I would take an awful lot of persuading to move away from the policy position that has been with us since the Standards in Scotland Schools Act of the presumption of mainstreaming. I would just personally, it would be a difficult policy to get past me for change. And I know that's where you're coming from. I think it is the right policy approach. But I accept also that what flows from that is it has to be, young people have got to be in the proper setting for their own benefit and support, but then also for the experience of other learners. The announcement by the government of the extra investment in ASN is us recognising that that challenge exists. And I'm pleased that we were able to find those resources. Of course, on all these questions, folk would like more resources, and I hear that. And we'll continue to identify if there is more resource we can put in to support that. And obviously, I encourage our local authority partners to prioritise this into the bargain. Obviously, in terms of the practice of the policy, though, I have appointed Angela Morgan from Include, who was formerly the Chief Executive of Include, to lead a review of additional support needs provision, not to question the policy in principle, but to identify for us where are the challenges in the implementation of the policy and to make sure that we properly address those. So that really will be the next part of that process. Angela will report to Parliament, and obviously there may be issues within that that I've got to address about future provision. But I think the identification of the necessary resources to enable us to handle that properly is a key part of the discussion. And obviously we are operating in very challenging financial times. You know, if you'd said to me in 2008 at the start of austerity and the aftermath of the banking collapse, this will go on for at least 11 years, I wouldn't have believed you. But that's what we're dealing with, and that puts strain on the whole system, and I acknowledge that. Which is why the government's taken some difficult decisions about tax to expand the resources that are available.
I mean, I won't pretend I don't know you, Eddie. Right? So your question, I think, does touch on an issue of concern for teachers. Interestingly, at that West Lothian meeting where I was addressing the issue of tackling workload, as soon as it opened up to the meeting, it ended up being about ASN and individual teachers talking about really stressful situations in their schools that they as individuals were finding difficult to cope with in terms of individual pupil behaviour, and finding it hugely frustrating because it meant that not only was a child not being supported, but because of that child's behaviour, other children weren't being educated effectively. And I think, you know, I agree with John, we are in favour of the presumption of mainstreaming, and the issue is about making sure that is adequately resourced. One of the difficulties that we all face is the exponential rise in the number of young people with ASN needs. So the presumption of mainstreaming can work if you're talking about 2 or 3 pupils in a secondary school. If you're talking about 5 or 6 pupils in a class, then you have a different order of challenge. And I think that's where, and again, I accept that austerity, you know, that there's been a real crisis in terms of resources. But that's where we need to reflect on the previous provision against the current demand, because we're not meeting the current demand adequately, and it is a stressful situation for schools. I think it's also an area where the role of local authorities is also important, because a child's behaviour at school is not peculiar to the school. It's as a result of the wider circumstances. And I think local authorities, in terms of coordinated support through other agencies, are part of how you actually address individual needs. So it can't just be the school by itself trying to cope with that. There has to be coordination across the council area. Okay, I think we've got time for one last question. And have we got one, or are we? Yep. You have, yes. Yes.
The government has, if I could ask you to consider what you were saying this morning about ring fencing money for additional support needs. Because there are occasions when money has been provided, but because local authorities are strapped in other ways, ASN is an easy target, and money can be taken from the ASN budget that's already there to address something else. And whereas, so if it is ring fenced, then that money is for ASN, and if you're having to pay for other things and you don't have money because of that, ASN is not having to take the hit.
Ring fencing, as I said this morning, ring fencing is a source of friction between government and local government, because basically local government doesn't like ring fencing, and sometimes government feels we have to ring fence because we want to get money to a particular issue, and that is a tense relationship. There's no easy way to describe it. The government relaxed a lot of ring fencing because local authorities put an argument to us that if they had the ability to use a global sum of money, they could use that more efficiently and more effectively than having to essentially report on individual work streams. And in an era of complex government where you're trying to get whole child solutions in place and whole child arrangements in place, there is a merit to that argument. But there is equally a merit to your argument, which is that sometimes resources intended for a particular purpose don't get there. And that's why we have to have some...
Or taken from it.
Yes, I appreciate that.
It's there, and then another need is seen.
Yeah.
So the money is put to that.
Yeah. And that's where we've got to have, very open and frank discussions with local government about how money is used. But I hear what you're saying about ring fencing, and it may well be that it's an issue that the government has to return to at some stage.
Just another sort of area, another aspect to that is that PEF money is almost ring fencing about equity, but are we including ASN within that equity? It's important to ensure financially that there's equity, and that's addressed, but ASN has been left out, can be left out in that respect, because there's PEF money that's not really to be considered for ASN.
Well, the PEF money has essentially been directed to achieve a specific policy objective under the control of individual schools, and that's a channel of resource coming directly from government. Individual schools, because of the fact that you will have quite a variability in the presence of additional support needs across schools with different levels of intensity and therefore cost in meeting those needs, the resources have always been channeled through individual local authorities. But it's an issue that Angela Morgan may well look at in the review that we've asked her to carry out, and obviously the government will engage in that when it's published with our local authority partners. Now I'm afraid I'm going to have to. Larry, you.
Well, just on the ring fencing issue, local authorities are strapped for cash, so there is real pressure there. But we lean towards protecting education budgets. I mean, John's greatest achievement as finance minister was ring fencing the money to protect teacher numbers, because if it hadn't been ring fenced, the numbers would have kept going down. We used to have class sizes of 20 in maths and English in S1, S2. As soon as the ring fencing was taken away, the class sizes went to 33. So if you're asking should we ring fence money for ASN, absolutely, because that's the way we can ensure that it's directed towards meeting that need. Now I know Cosla won't agree with that, but that's for John to sort out.
So there you are. He's got the copyright problem. I've got the Cosla issue. Now, I see Emma Seath is asking the question, and Emma is one of those journalists, so we better give Emma a chance. Sorry. Henry's here as well. But he's not got his hand up though.
Tess, you only get one per
question.
publication.
We'll give Emma.
It's totally related to what was just being said. I just wonder, how are you going to guarantee that 15 million for the additional support needs? Oh, hi. How are you going to guarantee that the 15 million for the additional support needs assistance is actually spent on that? Can you just sort of spell out for us how you're going to make sure that that gets to, ASN assistance?
We're having a very direct dialogue with COSLA to make sure that the 50 million goes to exactly that purpose, and that will be the basis of the distribution of the resources and the basis on which the government is offering the money. So it's we're taking forward that discussion in a collaborative way just now, but the purpose of it is to make sure we make the 50 million is spent on creating pupil support assistant posts within schools. and that's what we'll insist on. Okay, right, you've been generous with your time. Thank you very much for attending today. Thank you, Larry, for your participation
Thanks, Sean.
as well. Thank you very much.